Come paint a bunny with me just in time for Easter. If you don't know me, I am Viv with Art with Viv, and today we are going to paint a cute little bunny together. But first, I have to get my stuff ready. It is still messy from my last little painting adventure, so I'm going to clean up and then we'll get started. Now I have this oval that I'm going to use as a guide, and I'm just going to trace around it. I've got a number 2 pencil. You can use whatever pencil that you feel comfortable with. I'm tracing around my oval, and then I'm just going to do a structure of where I want to put my flowers, sort of a guide. So I'm just making circles where I want to put those flowers in, and I'm trying to spread them out and balance them across that bottom section. I'm not going to have flowers all the way around this little oval. It's just going to be sort of a partial wreath. Now once I get the flowers spaced where I want them, then I am going to go ahead and draw in a bunny, and I've decided I'm just going to have part of a bunny kind of peeking out from the flowers, like maybe he's in a rose bush or something and he's just peeking out. And so we've got our little bunny drawn, and then we are going to paint the flowers first. Now in this video, I'm going to just do some really loose abstract roses and some sort of, not really Cosmo, but just some petal flowers. I'm going to call them petal flowers because they're just made up flowers. Once I get my little rabbit the way that I want him, we will start mixing our colors and go ahead and get that together. Now you can see I've got some yellows and some peaches and some burgundies and some roses, and I'm going straight onto dry paper. At the very center, you just want to take your brush and do little C strokes, have them sort of overlapping but leaving some of the white of the paper to show through. You want it darker in the center, and then you want to dip that brush in water as you go out so that the color will get lighter. I've also added a little bit of that peach in there just to give it a little bit of variation in color, and I'm going to do that to all of the roses until I am satisfied. And just keep in mind that you want it to be darker in the center. You start out with small strokes, you get the strokes larger, dip your brush in water, and then make the larger petals on the outer edges. Once you get your roses painted where you want those, then I'm going with a little bit of a peachy color, and I've decided it's still too close to what color the roses are, so I've added a little bit more yellow to it. And I have an imaginary center, and I'm just I'm just painting little blobs around that imaginary center. Trust me, by the time we finish, it's going to look like flowers. Right now, it just looks like some blobs. Blobs are fine. Just make sure your blobs are around an imaginary center, and at the end, we're going to do a few things to make it look more like flowers. Now, I've had to switch my brush. I was using a number 2 brush. Now I've switched over to my number 6 just because it will go faster, and I have just painted some more blobs around an imaginary center, and I'm going to do the same thing here. And this one, I did the petal that's facing us more flat so that it looks like a concave flower. I'm going to continue with that, and we will be right back. Now I'm just finishing up putting in the last of the flowers. And if you don't mind, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification so you don't miss anything. Share this video with a friend. Any little bit helps. So I'm just finishing up the flowers, putting a few here and there. We're going to let that dry a little bit. Then I went ahead and I mixed up a yellow green. And I'm going to go ahead and paint in a few little leaf shapes near my roses. And they don't have to be perfect. You can leave a little bit of light in the center to look like a vein if you want to. I also think I'm going to need a little bit of a darker green, so I'm mixing up a nice dark green with a little bit of blue in it to make it more of a blue green, and that's going to be my accent leaves. So I'm going ahead in here, going and putting in my leaves and just sort of spacing those out, and you just want to fill up the space. Fill up your space with your leaf shapes. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be exact. You can just draw a stem and then put blobs on either side of the stem that are sort of leaf shaped. This is not a stressful painting. This is a painting you just want to do to relax. There's no wrong way to do it. You just want to start filling in with the green leaves wherever you see the need for those. Once we get in some leaves, we're going to let those dry. We're not going to fill in the whole thing with leaves right now. We're just doing a few here and there, and then we're going to work on the bunny while those leaves dry. So we're going to let those leaves dry once we get a few more in, and then we're just going to start on the bunny. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to get some black or whatever dark color you have. I think I have a lamp black on my palette today, and I've outlined his eye, washed my brush with some water, and I'm just pulling that black toward the center of the eye, but I'm leaving a little bit of the white of the paper to shine through so that it looks like a little bit of a highlight. And we're going to let that dry. Then around the eye, I'm just taking a really pale yellowy brown. And I'm going to do a wash all over the bunny rabbit wherever he's going to be brown. We're just going to do a nice wash over him while we're letting those leaves dry. Where we used to live, we used to get little bunnies in our backyard all the time. I had this like sunken garden almost type deal, and it had tons and tons of lilies in it, and a mama rabbit would have her babies in that nest of lilies every single year, and they would be so cute when they would come out in the spring, the little tiny babies, and they would be hopping around in the yard, and my kids always just loved that so much. Now here where we live, we have bunches and bunches of rabbits. I've only seen one baby. All the rest has been like grown rabbits, but they come in like a flock or whatever, a herd, whatever. What do rabbits come in? A warren? I know, but there's a lot of them. That's the point. So while I'm painting this rabbit and he's still wet, I'm going in with a darker brown so that I can hit some shadows where some of those shadows are. And it's going to give me soft edges because it is wet. We're doing a little wet and wet. I'm going to continue on his chest and his back with this more reddish brown. And you see I'm letting a little bit of that yellow shine through. We're going to put a little rose, a really pale watery wash of rose on the inside of his ear. And while the bunny is drying, we're going to come back. I have accidentally smeared these leaves down here, so I'm just going to paint over them and fix them up a little bit where I can. But it's no worries. This is just in my sketchbook. I'm not going to, this is not meant to go in a museum. It's just a sketchbook, a nice relaxing piece that I'm doing to sort of, train myself to be messy and see what I can do when I'm making blob flowers. Now I've went into that black, that lamp black, the same one that I used for the rabbit's eye, and I'm I'm painting little tiny stamen, little tiny centers into each one of those kind of peachy flowers, the petal flowers, right where the center is. I don't know if you can hear Dorian Gray, but he's my little diamond dove, and he is cheering us on in the background. He is just a cooing away. It's that time of year where he's single and looking to mingle, so he's letting the ladies know he's available. I know, Dorian, one day you're going to find you a girl. Anyway, I'm going to continue to fill in with more green leaves and vegetation. I'm going to alternate between the pale yellow green and the really deep blue green just to give it some variation. And I'm going to continue to fill that in as I go around the oval shape. Now once I get this last little bit of vegetation that I'm putting in there, I'm going to come back to my rabbit. He's dry now. And I want to darken up his eye. When it dried a lot lighter. And I want his eye to be dark and sort of shiny. So I'm darkening it up around. I'm leaving that highlight alone. I'm not putting any paint on that. And then I'm going to let that dry, and while that is drying, I am going to start putting in some shadows. We're going to put his little nose in. He's got a little dark nose. And I'm doing just some choppy brush strokes so that it looks a little bit like fur. It's kind of rough. They're not smooth. I want to give him like the texture of fur. But I'm going to go back over it with a wet brush with clean water, and that will smooth it out some. But it'll retain some of the texture but not be so bold. So I'm going ahead and doing that, putting in a little bit of reddish brown on his cheeks, his little lower lip. Not his cheek, it's his lower lip or his upper lip. Yeah, his upper lip. That's what we're doing. Now I'm just blending some of that color down onto his cheek. And now I am adding a darker brown tone under his head and just giving it a little bit of shadow. I'm not being real precious with my strokes. I'm just slapping them down there. Now I'm putting in some burnt umber right under that darker brown to give a deeper shadow. And it starts to let his head, his head start to look more three-dimensional, more realistic with every shadow you put in, every little texture. And I'm just blending that towards the flowers. And go ahead and take that darker brown and go outline his ear that's facing us. Put a few little ear tufts, tufts of hair in his ear, and make it darker around the edges. make it a little bit darker on the top of his head, and then deepen that shadow while it's still wet. I'm just dropping a little bit more paint in there so that it'll still have a soft edge. I'm going to go ahead and darken up that ear that's facing sort of away from us with a little bit, another layer of that brown. And then I'm going to take that dark deep brown and outline it as well, and this other ear facing us too. Add a little bit more shadow. As you see, I'm skipping around with the brush. I'm doing skippy strokes so that that lighter wash underneath will shine through some of that darker wash. Now I've just taken the green and I'm doing sort of a twiny vine stroke. I'm making the vines look like they're sort of twining around this oval with the green. And then I am just going to add some tiny little ovally blobs of paint in the different shades of green all along the edges of these vines so that it'll look like it's a vine that's intertwined all around this oval. Once I get the leaves in there, painted in there, and notice how I alternated darker leaves with the more yellow leaves, I'm just going to take those same colors that I used for the flowers and just do tiny dots. And that will just sort of unify that vine and bring those colors out into those greens so that it's not just a green vine. You'll have some visual unity by bringing those colors out into the vine. So I'm just going to take some of the flower colors and just do tiny dots, like they could be little buds or they could be a different kind of really tiny flower. It's just whatever your imagination decides they are. It is fine with me. So now I am just taking my really tiny number 2 brush with just the very tip of it, and with that dark rose I'm doing some shading lines, some little structure lines into those flowers that have petals, and pulling those little strokes right into the center so that it looks more like flowers. They're not flat, they have a little bit of shading, they have a little bit of texture, and that just gives them a little extra. Also going with some of that darker rose back into some of the roses, just a few strokes here and there to add a little bit of shadows. And I think that's looking really good now. So the last thing we're going to do is we are going to work on the rabbit, and this time I'm going to add a little gouache. I've got some white gouache on my palette. I went ahead and put the white highlights in his eye, just a dot, 2 little dots of that white gouache. I took some of the white gouache or gouache, however you want to say it. It's still white. It's still white opaque paint or watercolor. And I'm mix just a tiny bit of the red brown with it so that it's sort of a beige color. The white gouache turns beige, and I'm just doing some highlights here and there, just some texture to look like fur. I painted that really beige color around the rabbit's eye. I probably got that area a little bit too big. We'll make it smaller shortly. Now I'm going back into my really dark brown, and I'm adding some darker shadows, and I'm coming into this tan color with my dark brown and making it smaller because I think I got a little happy with it. And it got too big. So I'm just going to take some of that darker brown, burnt umber color and add some shadows and sort of make that whiter, lighter, paler area smaller around the eye so it's not so big. And just add some little brushwork to look like fur, and just keep kind of blending it with the tip of my brush, giving it some texture but also giving it some shadows. This little bunny is looking so cute. Now I am working wet on dry. The paper was dry before I started applying the gouache and a little bit of watercolor. Now I've got the watercolor here, the really darker color, and I am just doing all kinds of little brush strokes to look like fur. I'm letting those other layers shine through. I'm not painting it a solid brown. Now I'm taking that lighter color and just adding some highlights to his little ears and around the little fluffy part of the inside of his ears. Then I'm going to come and get some of that rose color and just paint the inside of his ear so that there's a shadow in there. You can see that his ear is concave. And then I'm taking a little bit of the pure white gouache and just adding some highlights here and there just to give him a little bit more interest in some areas down his chest, across his nose, and under his little mouth, and on his ears as well. So he is looking a little more realistic. We're not going for photorealistic. We're just going for pretty. And I think we've got something pretty pretty here. Pretty pretty. Is that a thing? Pretty pretty. I decided I probably needed to add a little bit more watercolor here and pull it more into the flowers. I've added a little bit of the lighter gouache in some areas as well, so that he'll have a little bit more highlights here and there. I'm just trying to clean up the area around his eye a little bit with some of that white gouache. Putting a little highlight on the inside of his ear with the white gouache. And there you go. We have done it. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss a thing, and share it with a friend. And I will see you soon.